How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you. In fact, it's a very special episode because the guest that I have on is on for a record-breaking fourth appearance. It's been a while since he's been back on the podcast, but today I am joined by a performance nutritionist who has worked with professional sports teams such as Wasps in rugby union, Hull KR in rugby league, recently joined up with Reading Football Club as well. Today I'm joined by the one and only, some may say a Strength Chat legend, Chris Lowe. How are you doing?
I'm amazing. Thank you very much. What an intro. And number 4, amazing.
That's it. I always think I'm hoping someone will scout me and I'll be like a ring announcer or something like that. I think, either listeners or people who have been on the podcast will get sick of me saying, but yeah, I'm open for events or ring calling or anything like that. So obviously, Chris, fourth appearance. Been on, a couple of times before. Been a while since we last caught up on the podcast. Since then, obviously, working with a couple of other teams. For anyone listening who hasn't already seen, Chris has got 3 seasons on his 3rd season of his own podcast as well. How are you? What have you been up to? What's been happening in your world?
Yeah, so I guess since the last time we spoke, it would have been probably lockdown 1, perhaps. And since then, new role with Reading Football, which is cool, breaking into the professional football scene. So a lot of things to learn and get up to speed with there, complete different culture and approach to rugby, which was just a nice learning experience and opportunity there. And like I said, pushing on with podcasts. So on season 3 now, which is cool. And also you're just chatting before we got on today, like how you on number 201 already is absolutely incredible. So I've definitely got some catching up to do here. But yeah, that's it. And then my online stuff has been absolutely flying now, working with sub-elite and elite athletes online from wide variety of sports, from combat sports all the way through to triathletes. So keep myself nice and busy.
Oh, good. And how does it feel being from especially your podcast up and running on your 3rd season? Does it feel weird being a guest now that you've been the host?
A little bit. I guess like when you're hosting yourself, it's you kind of got the structure there, where the conversation is going to go, where now it's a case of where's it going to go? I don't know. Let's explore and let's find out.
And with especially, I know obviously we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, but getting into Reading, obviously, a professional football club, because in terms of money, I think there's very few sports that have as much money as football and facilities and all that sort of stuff. From the experience of, because you have actually, you've worked with quite a variety of clients, like what you've mentioned there, like racing drivers, triathletes, cyclists, weightlifters, powerlifters, rugby players. How does football, elite level football weigh up with that? Is it something different? Is it or is it actually still the same? The difference is just it's a football club compared to other stuff.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Obviously, there's a lot more money in football. 100%. I think that's pretty straightforward. But then you can always argue and complain a little bit about the difference between what players get and the staff, backroom staff get, for sure. So there's always got that element to it. But ultimately, it's very, very similar. Like mentioned, like the culture between football and rugby is completely different. Just different lads, different backgrounds, different buy-in to the whole physical development side of things. Like rugby players really do buy into it like a huge amount, because if they're not strong enough, if they're not fit enough, and they get dominated on the field, then ultimately that's going to affect their selection and potentially get dropped and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically direct kind of results. Like if I do X, Y, Z in the gym, I do X, Y, Z in my nutrition, I'm going to be more robust, more dominant, and I'm going to be able to perform better. Where with a football player, if they build a little bit of muscle or something like that, there's no direct kind of like translation there onto the field. So they don't have that same level of buy-in. And because they don't have the same level of buy-in, then perhaps there's probably a little bit of buy-in issues with the fueling side of things as well, the nutrition. So it's interesting for sure. You just have to, word the conversation differently. The language you use is going to be different, and then just trying to get into the mind of like, right, what do they want to get, what's their challenges, and try and speak them in their own kind of language, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And as you'll know, I quite like going off on tangents sometimes when we get chatting, but especially with that, it's the same as if we were writing a training program. There's all the information there. There's all the information there on training. There's all the information there on nutrition, but you've got to be able to coach it. And you mentioned there a couple of times buy-in, and I know when we've spoken in the past, I love chatting about professional sport because it's not something I've only had a small taste of professional sport, if you like, and you always kind of have in your head that, they're elite level footballers, they're going to be switched on, knowing everything about nutrition, whereas actually, exactly like what you said there, it's a case of there isn't going to be that immediate impact of, yes, you do need strength in football, but it's a case of, well, I've just been playing football, my entire life. Why do I need to worry about that in terms of a skill set? But, it's those other things that we need to get in terms of an advantage on the field. And as well, I know, things are getting back to normal in terms of crowds, back to sport and all those side of things. But especially with the lockdowns and everything, with the online coaching that you're doing, how was that impacted? How did you get on with that? Because I know for a lot of people, with not being able to compete, a lot of people saw it as an opportunity to invest in other areas, such as if they've got niggles or injuries, working on a little bit of mobility, especially myself as a powerlifter, I got the time to do that. But also from a nutrition standpoint, how did you find lockdown and the whole COVID, situation?
Yeah, I think like lockdowns were perhaps a little bit of blessing in disguise for some athletes, that it just kind of bought them more time, because I was speaking to some of the rugby players at Wasps, and it's like, right, when's the last time you had this over like a month off? And they're like, I don't know, when I was like 12. It's been like sort of 20 years since they've had like a decent amount of time off. So they probably bought themselves like years of extra kind of playing time. So it's been amazing for them. And like I said, it just gives you time to kind of readdress any niggles or any kind of deficits or anything like that. I think like going into lockdown 1, if I can remember, is pretty quiet. There's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of people didn't know what was happening. Elite sport was getting cancelled. Like there's no kind of structures there. And if you think like a professional athlete, say in rugby or football, their diary is always done for them. It's like, right, in the club, breakfast this time, meeting 1 this time, prep to train this time, field session, boom, boom. Everything's kind of prescribed to them. They know exactly where they have to be and when they need to be there. So when that got removed and everyone's just at home, they're just a little bit lost in limbo. So that's where you can really hammer down and double down on the nutrition side of things. Like, right, let's develop good structure, let's develop good habits and routines. And then they were able to build that up really well. And it was amazing some of the kind of the transformations in body composition we're able to do throughout this period, because everything was so tightly controlled within the environment at home most of the time. There's no distractions of pubs being open, restaurants, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All these like higher calorie kind of deviations were perhaps somewhat limited there. So it's really, really a good opportunity to make good headway with it. And then some clients like online who are on the program now perhaps let things slip during lockdown, and then they're like, oh, I'm actually in the red here, I'm not in a good position. Then they join the program to kind of sort themselves out. So lockdown for athletes was, some saw as an opportunity to really progress and make a huge amount and gain loads of momentum going to the season ahead, with some kind of bury the head in the sand and let all kind of get the better themselves, shall we say.
You did see quite a lot of transformations. I know when the rugby union season started. So Stuart Hogg, obviously Scotland captain, great player at fullback, but obviously when he played, he's a stocky guy, and then all of a sudden he came out of lockdown and he was shredded. It was like, bloody hell, what's happened there? And you see how he's playing now, and he's probably playing some best rugby that he's played, and he looks as though he's quicker and sharper on the ball. Just by maybe dropping that excess weight, building a little bit more muscle, and just becoming a little bit more streamlined.
100%. I think a lot of athletes, well, when they want to obviously perform optimally, but then drop body fat, it's kind of they're stuck between like two places. Like they want to eat enough to support performance, but then restrict calories, and they can't quite get that balance. Like you definitely do it, but they kind of will struggle if they haven't got that guidance there. But within lockdown, they don't need to be performing at their best. They don't need to have peak performance. So it's like, right, I just drop my calories, sit in a deficit, and then I just drop body fat and lift a bit of weights and build a bit of muscle. So it's actually a lot easier from a decision-making perspective for them.
Yeah.
The balance the two.
Yeah, definitely. And that segues nicely into sort of the topics that we were going to touch on today. So for anyone listening that isn't already following Chris, he does Dedication to Education Wednesday, which I find really helpful. Looking at studies out there and putting a lot of useful content out, and especially like what we've mentioned about there in terms of athletes, whether it's professional rugby players, footballers, or even like Chris mentioned about the triathletes that he works with, or the strength athletes that he works with. How to drop fat, but make sure that we're keeping that performance, keeping that muscle mass up, and keeping that strength up. And I kind of just wanted to go right back to the start of the beginning of this whole process. So when you're walking into pre-season, or walking into a club, or working with an athlete, what's the importance of dropping fat? When will an athlete need to drop fat if they have to, and when is it needed? When do you sort of step in as the performance nutritionist and think, I think dropping fat will help your performance? What's sort of the starting process for that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends on the sport. So if we just kind of use rugby, for example, as we've kind of touched base on a couple of times. So for them, it's the big thing for them is perhaps their collision dominance. So kind of get that gain line, make momentum. And then momentum profiles can be a large part of that. So momentum profile is basically your speed times mass. So in the perfect world, the faster you can run and the heavier you are, when you run into someone, you're going to break through tackles and be more dominant. So that is absolutely awesome. So then you're just kind of playing with those two variables. Like if you were to drop mass, you will most likely become quicker because you're carrying less unfunctional mass. And therefore, if you're running quicker and you're still holding a decent amount of mass, then if you kind of put those numbers together in an equation, that's when it's going to be very beneficial for you. But if you become too light and drop too much mass, then our equation is going to be unfavorable. And when you run into contact, you're not going to have that much of an impact. Like if I ran into 130 kilogram prop weighing 75 kilos, I'm not coming out in a good position, So there's such thing as becoming too light. So it's finding that sweet spot. So what we look at is just having almost two standards. So where is your standard for your position in sport? And then where is your body composition within that? So it's almost like finding your fighting weight. And then once you find your fighting weight, let's refine composition to have more muscle mass and less body fat within that. And then when you plug those numbers into that momentum profile equation, it should have favorable kind of outcomes. So we kind of look at that. So it'll be a lot of conversations with the players, like where do you feel you best sit, really? Like how do you feel on the field? How's that spring your step? Where's your speed? Where's your repeatability? Because dropping body fat is not only going to improve speed and acceleration, but your overall efficiency. Every step you take is less calorie demanding. So that's going to translate into better repeatability, so less fatigue. So if can you be as good in 70 minutes as you were in the first 10 minutes in terms of your freshness and your work capacity and mental capacity as well. Yeah. And then you got other things like agility and things like that. But then it's just always finding that fine balance, isn't it? And just always the conversation is with the athlete, with the player, is like, this is where I think we should go. I think these should be favorable. Speaking to the performance team as well, the S&Cs, the rugby coaches, with the player itself. Like, where do we think is going to be best, and where can we have like a little bit of an agreement here? So that's where we kind of work it. So it's not me going and saying like, your body fat's too high, you need to drop it. It's more of the exploration, get them on side, and then just trying to find out where the best thing is with them. Because they might have like, I don't know, say you have like a tie head prop who's 134 kilos, and we think like, okay, if you drop maybe 4 or 5 kilos, you're going to be better around the field, it's going to be more mobile. But maybe the last time he was 129, 130 kilos, he got absolutely destroyed in the scrum. So in his head, he's like, I don't want to go back there because that is bad. I'm light. I'm skinny, 129 kilos. I don't want to go there, you know? So then it's just like, right, let's get them on side and let's figure out where we can get to with it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was a good way of explaining it into how it's going to impact performance, because, you know, sometimes it is a case of, you always think that, athletes, they're professional athletes, so they never have to worry about fat or anything like that. Whereas, you know, actually there's, from the head coaches down, especially in a team sport, they're going to have tactics, you know, for that, whether they want to play a fast game, or especially with some of the rule changes in rugby union now, you know, they have to be a lot fitter. You also look at, you know, rugby league, and, you know, they've got loads of running, so you can't be carrying a lot of weight, you know, a lot of weight in a sport like that. When you mentioned it varies from sport to sport, and you kind of have a look at, you know, the boxing and on UFC. A prime example is, it was on a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you watched the heavyweight fight. It was between Ngannou and I can't remember the other guy's name. But as heavyweights, you know, they were pretty lean, and it was a good match. Whereas you look at other, you know, especially the bigger guys, you know, Tyson Fury, for example, you know, he ballooned up, you know, compared to Anthony Joshua, two very different body shapes and body types. And I kind of wanted to touch on, when you have very different athletes like that, like you would look at Anthony Joshua and think, shredded, he's an athlete. You would look at Tyson Fury and think, Anthony Joshua has got him. So in terms of being, you know, pound for pound, keeping that power and keeping that strength, you know, how does that vary? You know, does what an athlete look like has any relevance on, you know, the maintaining their muscle mass and their strength? Does that kind of make sense?
I think with, say, like if you were to compare like AJ and Tyson Fury, like I'm not going to say I know boxing at all, the technical side of things, but it could be an argument there. Is like, is there a skill difference there? Like, ultimately, if you want to be a good athlete, you got to be good at your sport. You need to have that skill level there. And then obviously then the physical and mental components support that. Yeah, like I think like when you probably think of like AJ and Tyson Fury or someone else higher body fat, you would automatically kind of place them in kind of different boxes, like you're professional, you're not professional. And I know coaches from wide variety of sports will think exactly the same as that. And then some sports, if it's a team sport, that can even like affect selection sometimes. So it's like, right, not professional, he's professional. It's just, you know, that professional, quote unquote, athlete is shredded, but he could be in a massive energy deficit all the time and compromising his performance. Where someone who's a little bit higher in body mass, higher in body fat, could be eating our energy balance, calorie maintenance, and really supporting performance and recovery, and is actually performing a lot better. So it's you know, I think you need to look a couple of layers more than just like, he's got high body fat and professional, he's got low body fat, professional. From the face value, you're probably right, but then when you start looking a little bit deeper, it's like, okay, maybe not. Like, just to kind of use a different sport, like say endurance-based sports, triathletes, cyclists, runners, all the time, they're always looking at power to weight ratio, you know, so they want to have high amounts of power output with a low amount of weight, because then they're more efficient and ultimately they're going to be better at their sport. But 9 times out of 10 from conversations I've had with them, they've tried pushing their body weight down so low, get their body fat so low, that they massively compromise their power output. So therefore, they're in exactly the same position, drop mass, but then compromise their output. and their overall power to weight ratio is the same, but they're in a big energy deficit and they feel like shit and they can't perform and they're getting ill and they're getting injured. So, sometimes leaner isn't always better. And I think each sport has like a nice peak or optimal kind of range. Like being shredded 9 times out of 10 again isn't the right thing to be doing unless you have the ability to naturally stay at that level, which 10% of athletes probably do, but most of them, they can't maintain our low levels of body fat. Too many compromises there. So for them, it's like, right, let's focus on maintaining your weight and like a decent standard of body composition or body fat, but let's just focus on performance. Let's get you strong. Let's get you performing well so you can actually produce more power. And that way you're going to improve your power to weight ratio instead of trying to drown yourself in an energy deficit, trying to improve it.
Yeah, definitely. And, a couple of times you said there how it's going to impact performance, and, whether it's you just training in the gym, or whether you're actually, in a competitive sport, the performance is ultimately what you want to be focusing on. Like what you say, if you're lacking energy, you're not going to be able to enjoy anything because you're going to be knackered all the time. And in terms of the recovery side of things, how does that, or how much of a role do you have? Because I know you mentioned you speak with the S&C coaches, speak with the physio and all those sorts of things. When you're talking about that plan in terms of, right, this season we're playing a faster game of rugby, we want everyone to drop weight so they can still do that. What's your role in terms of the training and them to be able to recover from that? Because, does that vary in different parts of the season? Because a lot of that might happen in pre-season where people are looking to drop weight, whereas it's highly unlikely that mid-season it's just going to be like, no, let's get this prop dropping down a little bit because they're already in the season. How does your role sort of work with the S&Cs and being able to manage that?
Yeah, obviously recovery is a massive thing. Like, again, use rugby as an example. Like, it's going to take you about 5 full days to return back to baseline before you actually fully recover and go again. And within that period, you still got training, you still got weights and stuff. So you got to make sure that the overall fatigue doesn't accumulate and therefore you burn out or pick up injuries and stuff like that, which you see all the time. So just trying to manage it. Now, putting someone in a big energy deficit, if they're really struggling with muscle soreness and recoverability, you're only going to speed up that fatigue. So it's knowing when to push and when to pull. And so preseason is obviously a prime time to kind of be more progressive with body composition. So it's almost like for some individuals, body composition is objective number 1, performance objective number 2. But then as you go to the season, that flips around. It's like everything has that performance outcome. It's like, yes, if we lean and look great and stuff from the outside in, but if you're not performing well, then you're not as effective in your sport. So performance is always number 1, but regardless of it. So within the season itself, you're just making small changes if you can. If you got a couple of weeks where you can push, then you can push. If you got a bigger turnaround with days, then you can do so. So if you got a 7-day turnaround, 8-day maybe, you got a little bit more of an opportunity to push a little bit more with a calorie deficit if needs be. But if you got a 5-day turnaround or something really short, it's like, no, like performance and recovery is the higher priority here. So you're always switching around the priorities, and it just makes sure the players are aware of that, when to push, when to pull. If, for example, in the perfect week, you'd have, say, game day -1, game day +1, you probably keep those. So definitely -1 on game day, high calories to fully support performance. Game day +1, let's keep carbohydrate up there a little bit to support recovery as well. Then the other 4 days, if we need to drop body fat and work on composition, that's when we can do it. And then you're going back up to performance mode in the weekend. So it's that push-pull kind of approach. Know when you're pushing with body composition, know when you're pushing with performance. And there might be, a couple of weeks off in the season if you got kicked out of like a European Championship, for example, then we've got opportunities where we can do something there. Or if a player has like a longer term injury or something, this is an opportunity to not necessarily drop body fat because that can impair the healing process, but can we build muscle during this period? You're going to naturally find pockets where you can push with either muscle growth or fat loss. if someone's say like, again, just use props, for example, if they're scrummaging every single week, their shoulders and neck, their back is all wrecked and stuff. And they're not going to go into the gym on that Monday, load a bar on their back and squat, like they're absolutely ruined. So how many opportunities do they get for productive weight training sessions?
Yeah.
1 or 2 maybe. So just being realistic with the goals and managing expectations for the players. If you're doing 1 or 2 sessions a week, are you maximally building muscle? Probably not. So it's more a case of less, again, manage expectations. This is more of a maintenance. So therefore we need to find pockets where we can push and develop muscle mass or whatever needs to be developed.
Yeah, it looks as though it's a little bit like managing like a jigsaw puzzle, or it's spinning lots of plates in terms of a team sport side of things. Because you mentioned a couple of times there, finding the pocket of time where you want to be focusing on things. Because especially off the top of my head, literally just because I was listening to a podcast a couple of days ago, like basketball, like they must play they'll play loads of games during the season. All right, not as much contact. I think maybe some basketballers might disagree with me there, but they play quite a lot of games, and it's being able to manage that a little bit more. Obviously, on the we've touched quite a lot on the strength side of stuff, and I always gravitate or ask a lot about the strength sport side of things. In terms of powerlifting, weightlifting, strongman, there's larger time frames between competitions, and sometimes athletes have taken months or even a year out of competing to drop body fat, drop down a weight class, because if they can keep their muscle mass but drop fat, they can be more competitive, or equally go up a weight class. But sometimes, and I know I've done it, is go up a weight class but then just put fat on, and then you end up hindering your performance. So how does that thought process in terms of finding pockets of time, managing that energy balance and your recovery, does that change on a bigger time frame when you're working with strength athletes?
Yeah, for sure. It's much nicer actually. So it's we obviously then have a nice consistent long-term block, and you can really build momentum with it. Team sport, it's start stop. It's like, where can we push, where can we pull, like I mentioned. But if you have a powerlifter, weightlifter, and they got 6 months, it's like, right, we can just drop into a small energy deficit, do things gradual, really focus on protecting performance, your KPIs, energy levels, food focus, recovery, mood, all that kind of stuff, and just do things nice and gradually. Well, again, make sure that you are maintaining muscle mass and driving up strength for sure. So in terms of rates of fat loss on a weekly basis, you typically would look at maybe 0.5 to maybe up of 1% loss per week in body mass. Easy maths, if you're a 100-kilo athlete, 0.5 to 1 kilo. What we need to appreciate is that the bigger the energy deficit we go into, the more compromise and trade-offs we're going to have. So if you want to push up to 1% or above 1%, you're going to be eating less food, you're going to be eating less carbohydrate. That's going to impact your ability to perform, your ability to lift the necessary weight and get that stimulus, and then drive up strength. One of the reasons a lot of athletes will lose strength or muscle mass, well, one of them is the fact that they go into too much of an energy deficit to try and push the process. They don't have energy to actually go into the gym to perform. They can't lift the necessary loads, and therefore they don't have that same stimulus. And if the body's like, right, there's less coming in, and if you don't use that muscle, then you're going to lose it. So it's like, well, okay, we'll lose it then. And then that's the repeated cycle there for sure. So that's kind of an observation. But if you go in a small energy deficit, you still have a good amount of calories, a good amount of carbohydrates, enough energy available to train hard with focus and intent. Then you can lift the load. Great, you can hit your numbers, and then you can still progress. Whether you're progressing or whether you're increasing muscle mass is another kind of question, especially for like a well-trained athlete. But in terms of neurological gains, you can definitely do that in an energy deficit, like 100%. You've seen it loads of time with powerlifters and weightlifters when they're making weight and do it slowly and gradually, but the strength, the numbers are going up. It's like probably not increasing muscle mass, maybe a little, but probably not. But neurological gains, 100%.
Yeah.
So the whole take home from that is, don't rush it, set realistic timeframes, and just take your time through it, because there's no point trying to drop 10 kilos in 5, 6, 7 weeks, something like that. Your strength goes down, and then you have to rebuild back up. You're lighter, but you're weaker, and it's not an overall efficient process. And obviously, we want to be as efficient as possible and get the most out of every single day as an athlete, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that, I've massively kind of bought in from the last couple of times we've chatted. On previous podcasts, we've spoken about, cutting weight for a competition, and, the process of being able to do that so we don't lose strength. And I think a lot of the content that you put out there, and we've touched on it quite a lot, is, performance is that's the main focus that we want on the outcome, because we want to be strong, we want to be fast, we want to be able to produce power there. But you still hear and see athletes who drop weight quite quickly, whereas everything that you've mentioned there, of even with the team sport side of things, trying to find pockets to still keep it efficient and sustainable, rather than seeing big fluctuations. Obviously with strength athletes there's a little bit longer on that, but why do you think that we still see people dropping weight and then or trying to drop weight quickly and then seeing big drops off in strength, when, like what you've said there, and I'm sure there's other people who have worked with other nutritionists who have the same philosophies on it, but why do you think people still get it sometimes wrong, and then come to coaches such as yourself to be like, look, I've done this and I've lost strength, I need some help and guidance?
Yeah, I just don't think they have realistic expectations of what is possible. Like, they might see, I don't know, someone make a huge amount of progress in 3, 4, 5 weeks. Like, they didn't have abs in this picture, they have abs in that picture. It's like, oh, that's what I need to do. They might have read somewhere they're on like 1,800 calories. Like, oh, I need to burn 1,800 calories. So they're not understanding, like, it's specific to their demands, their expenditure, and it's the relative energy deficit based on that. So I typically say, right, let's start at between 10, 15% energy deficit, and then let's work off that and let's see how we progress. Like, for some reason, a lot of athletes just have like 2,000 calories in their head, like, oh, I need 2,000 calories to drop body fat. It's like, you're burning 4,000 a day. Like, no, you don't. Eat 3,500, eat a lot of food. So it's, just probably just not giving themselves enough time, a little bit of panicking, and then maybe a little bit of comparison of what other people are doing potentially. And maybe a little bit of like patience as well. It's like, they just want immediate results. They want to say like, right, I want to get shredded in 4 weeks, let's do it. And they probably, yes, you can, but you're probably not seeing the bigger picture of what that is like beyond that, like in terms of like the energy levels, their performance, their food focus, their relationship with food, all that kind of stuff. So maybe they're just chasing that kind of golden nugget a little bit too much.
Because you always think, and that's an interesting point, because it's a little bit like working with general population clients. I've been going to the gym a week while I lost all the fat on my body. Right, okay, well, it's going to take time. It isn't going to happen overnight. And especially the more I've spoken to you and other coaches and athletes at the elite level, it's those 1%. It's not going to be like a powerlifter, for example. The world records aren't beaten by 10, 15 kilos. They're just chipped because it's those small changes. And do you think that's maybe part of it, that when you said there they're trying to chase that golden nugget, if you like, that they're looking for those 1%, whereas actually there isn't a special magic formula. It's just a case of, like what you've mentioned in terms of that process taking a little bit longer time.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of people are trying to like optimize before they standardize. Like, they're trying to do everything like optimal, chase those 1% at times, but most of the time, like, they forget about the basic standard stuff. Like, real simple, like, habits, behaviors that they do on a daily basis. Like, have you even like prepped your food? Have you cooked your food? Have you bought the food in? Do you have the food available with you? Are you sleeping enough? Like, these world class kind of basics, are they doing that first? Which is boring, it's not sexy, it's dull, like, but a lot of people forget about that basic stuff, and they kind of chase all this like fancy kind of top end kind of periodization kind of stuff. So maybe they kind of going from A to Z because that's what other people are doing, but potentially. And that A to M, for example, takes a long time. Takes a long time to generate new habits that's sustainable, and you're going to have results that are going to last for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. I think I always try and use the analogy of nothing ever happens overnight. You don't just sit in a car and be like, yeah, I know how to drive now. Like it takes time to learn that, and then the more you drive, the more you remember those habits and get consistent with it. One thing that you mentioned on, just building on sort of from that, maintaining strength, maintaining muscle mass, dropping fat, and you actually commented on it before when you spoke about the triathletes in terms of that strength to power ratio. And there's one thing at the minute which you hear quite a lot of people, or I've had quite a lot of people come into the gym, and other coaches that I working with athletes who want to be strong, but they also want to run a half marathon, or they want to do an Ironman or something like that, the hybrid athlete. And how does that sort of, because in rugby, you're going to do weight training, but a lot of the conditioning, they're not going to be running for 2+ hours. Yeah, it's going to be short bouts of work, and they only play for 80 minutes. Yeah, and if we're talking about props, they might not even be running that far. Myself speaking as a forward there. But when we're looking at people who are looking to squat double body weight, or do strongman events, and then they want to be able to run a half marathon or a full marathon, how do you manage their nutrition to then complement just the sheer volume of training that they're doing? Because you do hear people of running a marathon in the morning, or squatting double body weight in the morning, and then doing a marathon on the afternoon. Is that sustainable, or is that just right? You're going to only do that once, and then you're going to have to chill out, and then have another period of time before you do it again.
Yeah, like this hybrid athlete is quite a cool idea, isn't it? Like squatting 200 kilos in the morning, marathon in the evening is quite appealing. I guess, like, is it sustainable? Like, if the training load is manageable and you built up to be able to tolerate it, then yeah, it could be for sure. Like, the body's pretty good at adapting, but everyone's on a different basis for sure. Could I do a heavy weight training session and a marathon in the afternoon? Not at all. So again, from the maintaining perspective, it's based on the individual and where they're at, I guess. But in terms of like the nutrition side of things, it's just about, first and foremost, like the primary objective is, are you meeting the body's demands? There's a huge amount of physical stress going on there through different like energy systems and different sort of recovery pathways we need to kind of like consider, really. So if they're doing, I don't know, 15 hours a week of training, like 4 or 5 weight training sessions, the remaining running or biking or swimming or something like that, the first and most important thing is that you just hit your total daily intake. Because if you don't, then if you're under eating every single day, under recovering every single day, then that's just going to again accumulate and compound, and in a month's time you're going to burn out. You can have too much like allostatic load, like that wear and tear on the body and mind. You're just going to burn out and break. So it's being able to eat enough to sustain that for sure. That is the most important thing. Like for many, they'll be like training like concurrently, I guess. So they're doing like maybe a strength session into like a running session or something like that. Like, I can't remember what research paper was, who is by what date, but they came out with that kind of interference, training interference, didn't they? So when you're doing weight training followed by high intensity training, you're going to get like training interference and like a splash effect. So you get a dampened training adaptation from the strength work. So the idea is then to kind of perhaps split those training sessions into 2 and having like a bigger gap, like an AM session and a PM session perhaps. So again, the research is a little bit hit and miss there at times, but some would say that, or some research would show that if you do a strength session and a high intensity like interval session, that's when you get interference. But if you do a strength session with low intensity, then you're not going to get that interference, and it could actually complement the strength work. But ultimately, it's from a training perspective and a periodization, it probably makes sense to kind of split the 2, like into an AM or PM or something like that. And then with that, then you can periodize the nutrition accordingly. So we kind of look at 1, weekly periodization, and 2, daily periodization. weekly periodization is basically, are you eating enough carbohydrates based on the demand of the day? So you might have like a high day, medium day, low day, very high day, or something like that. So first and foremost, are you having enough carbohydrate on a day to support the fueling requirement day? And then I'm working off like a paradigm of like fueling equals recovery, your recovery equals your fueling equals recovery, and so on. Essentially, it's like how much carbohydrate you have in the muscle going into each and every single day.
Yeah.
And then once you've got the periodization of the week kind of sorted, you could look at another step then, which is within day carbohydrate periodization of, if you were to do, for example, your morning session, like your cardiovascular work in the morning, you may do that under low carbohydrate availability perhaps, and then the evening session, which may be a strength session, you do it under high carbohydrate availability. So you're still eating the right amount of food on a daily basis, but you are then just periodizing it differently. So just because we're withholding carbohydrates in the morning, it doesn't mean it's a low carbohydrate diet. It just means that you're having low carbohydrates in certain parts of the day. And this is what I'm doing with my training now. One, because it fits my preferences. I do my sort of bike work in the morning because I do a lot of mountain biking. When I get bike fit, I'm still strong. So I do my bike work in the morning, do that like in a fasted state, just under low carbohydrate availability. Then withhold carbohydrates for a few hours, have my lunch, and then start having more carbohydrates in the afternoon and the evening. And I'm still pushing maybe 400 grams of carbs in the back end of the day, which is nice. One, my food focus is higher in the evening. I like eating more in the evening, and I don't have much appetite in the morning. So it fits my personal preferences quite nicely. But what you might see in the literature is showing is that the endurance adaptation is enhanced under like this perhaps low energy availability, where there's perhaps depletion of carbohydrates within the muscle, which then signals different enzymes to increase like the mitochondrial content of the muscle. So therefore you have more fat oxidation, more fat utilization there, and therefore you can spare carbohydrates. So we know that, say, in endurance sports, your carbohydrate availability is going to be absolutely key for performance. And most people will suffer with the performance in endurance sports because they don't have enough carbohydrate in the muscle. So the idea is to build more mitochondria within the muscle. That then burns more fat for fuel and spares carbohydrates. And therefore, you have more carbohydrates in the tank for when you need it at the back end of the race. So that's that idea. And that kind of signaling pathway stays on for about 3 or so hours. So then it's like, right, we know that muscle is built under high energy availability, high amounts of food, high amounts of carbohydrates, so less backload calories there. And let's have a nice sort of anabolic environment in the evening. And then that is going to ramp up enzyme mTOR to stimulate muscle protein synthesis and creation of new muscle tissue. Now, this is all theoretical. Like, there's no actual, from what I'm aware, there's no studies showing that this framework enhances anything. It's just a theoretical model. Like, when you put things under the microscope, this is perhaps what's optimal in those kind of conditions. Let's kind of put it together and let's kind of create this framework. It works really well for me, like I mentioned, because it fits my personal preferences. Like, based on my strength and my fitness level, me just jumping on the bike, me just getting into a bar and squatting, I'm going to get stronger, right? So how much stronger and how much fitter am I going to get by doing this framework? I have absolutely no idea, but I quite like doing it. I get to eat like 400 grams of carbohydrates after lunch. It's not bad. It's like last night, I like, I think after my training session, it was like 700 grams of potato, a bagel, and some fruit. I was like, it's a good meal, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think that's sorry, go on.
No, that's like, again, just a little bit of a framework. But as I kind of mentioned, one of those quotes was, I think it's James Clear from Atomic Habits said, it's like, you've got to standardize before you can optimize. Yeah. It's like, this is probably the optimal theoretical framework, but I think I'm all right in my nutrition. Like, I've standardized quite a lot of things, so I can like play around with the optimal theoretical stuff. Yeah. Where some people is like, don't even focus on that stuff, especially if it doesn't interfere, especially if it interferes with your preferences. Just focus on eating enough food on a daily basis, because that is going to deliver 80-90% of the results. This is like the little bit of fine tuning, just to inch out a little bit more gains based on what you have, so you're a little bit more efficient. But if this framework compromises your good eating habits, your relationship with food and your preferences and all that kind of stuff, then don't bother. Like,
I think from there, the main thing was, and that, kind of touching on the at the other end of the spectrum, I know we've spoken about a lot of the strength and power side of things from the team sport, powerlifting side of things. And I know it's kind of at the other end of the spectrum, kind of a hybrid athlete, if you like. But I think it is, you said it a couple of times there, of just make sure that you're eating enough, and then you can fine tune it from there. And it's kind of, it's surprising how many people do undereat. And like what you were saying, if you're undereating every single day, at some point your performance is going to suffer, and that goes for general population who are looking to get involved in sport or powerlifting, but then for athletes as well, and making sure that when you do then fine tune it, that's when you're going to see those benefits in performance. And I know from the average to elite program that you run, is that kind of where the common theme that you see with the athletes that you work with, and is that sort of your process in terms of changing things around so that they're getting enough food in, but then manipulating that amount of food to because some of the testimonials and the people that you've worked with, smash it out of the park. Do you know what I mean? So is that the small change or the formula that you use to take them to that elite level?
It completely depends with about 100%. Like I got some, say like triathletes, Ironman triathletes, for example. They got huge training loads, training 15-20 hours a week, and they come to me scared of carbohydrates. I'm going to get fat. I don't want to put sugar in during my rides. It's like, okay, you're scared of putting like 30 grams of carbohydrates in per hour. That's 120 calories. You're burning 800 calories per hour. How is this going to make you fat? Please tell me. And they can't think about it logically because they got this fear of carbohydrates. So it's like, right, let's not focus on like within day periodization or any of that fancy stuff. Let's just get you more accustomed to having more carbohydrates in your diet. And then let's put more carbohydrates in your sessions and then build you up from there. And there's a few athletes now, a few cyclists, I'm doing this kind of train low, sleep low kind of approach where we're withholding carbohydrates at certain meals or putting more carbs in with other meals, and kind of got them to that kind of nice, happy medium. But some of them is like, right, just do needs analysis. Where's the low hanging fruit? Do they need to put more carbs in this meal? Do they just need to make sure they do a food shop so they have the food available to cook the meal so they can stay on plan? Can we just think of like, right, footballers, prime example, for some reason they don't have breakfast. Why? it's like you're training in the morning, like football's a high intensity sport. You're going to actually rinse through carbohydrate stores. Have some breakfast. And if they do, it's like, oh, I'll have an omelette with maybe one piece of toast. It's like, no, hanging loads of carbs in there. So it's just slowly changing those behaviors. Might be a case of like, are we having enough protein throughout the day, 4 to 6 protein hits a day to maximize muscle protein synthesis? Now, maybe let's focus on that if you're got heightened like recovery demands or more muscle specific goals. Yeah, adaptation, strength, all that kind of good stuff. So it's just really doing a needs analysis and seeing where they're at. I think most of the people who come on my program, they would have followed me for quite a long time and they would have had a good understanding of what they need to be doing. So they are trying some of this stuff, but perhaps can't quite put it together. So that's when I could come in and actually just fine tune a couple of things because they are actually on a good level. They've got a really solid base. But then there's some people just, got to a very high level within the sport, but perhaps just don't quite know anything about nutrition. So you have to really build them up. And that's the exciting part, because if they got to an elite or international level in their sport by not doing anything with their nutrition, it's like, let's just rubbing your hands together. It's like so much gains to be made here. It's frightening.
Yeah.
So it's a complete wide range of educational levels that come in. And that's quite nice because it tests me as well of like, right, how can I work with this person to get the most out of them based on where they're at? And not just kind of painting everyone with the same brush,
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, it's always good, when, because it is, there is always that fear of, oh, I want to put weight on or I want to put fat on or anything like that. And thinking that, carbs are the devil, or if you eat this, it's not going to be right. Whereas actually, there's nothing better. I had a check-in with a client earlier today. And it was kind of thing of, I just need you to eat more food. We're not eating enough. Like, I was looking at a food thinking, I am starving looking at this. Like, no wonder we need that. And then all of a sudden, eating a little bit more food, performance goes up in the gym, confidence increases, which has an impact on performance. They're recovering a little bit better. They're bouncing into the gym a little bit more, as opposed to going, like we chatted about at the start, feeling as though we're absolutely knackered and not we're not getting enough food in. And across the spectrum, it is that thing of, right, what can we change, what can we add in, especially when we're looking at some of the athletes that you worked with have got to national, international level without kind of, because you do hear, you see it in powerlifting, people have crazy amounts of strength, and then all of a sudden either they drop a little bit of body fat but stay in that weight class, or maybe even drop down, and then they just dominate, and they just see their performance shoot up. So yeah, quite a lot of topics thrown around there, and some tangents thrown in. But from everything, I think there was quite a lot of little snippets of information I think people could take from there, and some good quotes. But the last question that I always like to ask is, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from everyone, for everyone listening, and from what we've chatted about today?
Yeah, like if we're looking at optimal performance, you always have to meet the body's demands. Whatever you're burning, you need to put 100% of those calories and carbohydrates back in. The further south we move from that baseline of calorie maintenance, the more your performance is going to be compromised, the more muscle, more strength you're going to lose. So if you've got body composition goals, especially fat loss, do things slowly. Like, take your time, give yourself enough time, and just be really patient with the process of it. Don't rush it, because if you rush things, big energy deficits, poor performance, which obviously we do not want in the slightest. And know when the best time to do it is. Look at your diary, look at your year, your calendar, see what competitions you have, pre-season, in-season, off-season, whatever sport you're in. When's the time to really push with it? When's the time to perhaps pull back? What's the primary objective for different phases of training? So just have like a plan, like just think long term, and don't force it. Like, you can't rush athletic development. It takes time. Whether you're trying to drop body fat, whether you're trying to get stronger, build muscle, it takes time. Just be really, really in love with the process, because if you're in love with the process, you just turn up. As long as the process is right, of course, you just tick the boxes every day, you do your non-negotiables, and the outcome is a byproduct of that process. A lot of athletes would be so focused on the outcome, which, to be fair, like, I don't blame them. Like, the athletes, they win or lose, like, it's a scoreboard, they're always outcome driven, but trying to get them to the mindset of being process driven. And if you implement the process consistently, then you're going to get the outcome, like 100%.
I think that's a good point to finish on. And I know we spoke a lot about sort of like you touched on the physiology of how this all impacts performance in terms of energy levels, in terms of muscle mass, and we could break down the layers even more. Whereas actually, in a summing up round-away, we've got to, which you touched on a lot, especially with, because Atomic Habits, I've read that. I think that's a great book. We need to get those basics done. Keep that consistency. You touched on it earlier. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but we need to hit those boxes first, and then we can start looking at the other things. Whereas, I know it sounds like a daft quote, but you need to do the first things first. Unfortunately, you can't skip a step. Thanks a lot, Chris, for taking the time to jump on. Really enjoyed, as always, picking your brains. For everyone listening who might have any questions about what we've chatted about there, want to check out your podcast or your content, or maybe even get involved in some coaching with you, where can people find you or reach out to you?
I think Instagram probably be the best one to go for. Instagram, so my handle is @ChrisLowe or the Athlete Nutrition Coach. I don't even know my own Instagram handle. I'm on there so many times a day. Chris Lowe Nutrition, go for that one. And then website is chrislowenutrition.com. And then you could go to online coaching and see all the spiel and sort of about the program. So yeah, they're the two places. And then on Spotify or your favorite podcasting place, search Average to Elite podcast.
Awesome. He's a nutritionist. He's not social media, so he does have Instagram. But no, for everyone listening, go back, check the other episodes that I've done with Chris. 100% check out the content that he puts out there, as well as his podcast. It's really, really interesting. It is some really useful content that you can use. And, you know, even though, like what we've said, you can break down the layers for nutrition, but ultimately, you know, a lot of it is, you know, common sense and getting those first things done first. But if anyone has any questions, 100% reach out to Chris. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.